From efforts to downsize the federal government to cracking down on illegal immigration, we'll take a closer look at the first 30 days of the Trump administration. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Under his America First agenda, U.S. President Donald Trump has signed off a flurry of actions to change how the U.S. government operates. Several of his executive orders, including birthright citizenship, suspending foreign aid, and the new Department of Government Efficiency, are facing legal challenges. We begin our coverage with this report from CGTN's Jim Spellman.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
In the month since his swearing in, U.S. President Donald Trump has upended American politics, not to mention international relations, frustrated his critics, and begun radically changing the U.S. government. He has so far signed dozens of executive orders on a wide array of issues, withdrawing the U.S. from the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Agreement, moving to end diversity programs, restricting rights for transgender Americans, beginning a major immigration crackdown, giving TikTok a temporary reprieve, pausing most overseas aid, and he has even moved to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. On trade, Trump rolled out 10% tariffs on Chinese goods, with more tariffs threatened, including on goods from U.S. allies, including Canada and Mexico, while promising so-called reciprocal tariffs on goods from all countries.
And on trade, I have decided, for purposes of fairness, that I will charge a reciprocal tariff, meaning whatever countries charge the United States of America, we will charge them.
Trump's tariffs have drawn warnings from economists.
Tariffs are invariably bad for an economy, and they're a tax on consumers. They are not paid by foreigners. They're just an indirect way to tax your own citizens.
Trump is promising to end major global conflicts. On Ukraine, he has proposed peace talks with Moscow that risk alienating Kyiv. In the Middle East, he has proposed moving Palestinians from Gaza and a U.S. takeover.
We're going to take over that piece, and we're going to develop it, create thousands and thousands of jobs, and it'll be something that the entire Middle East can be very proud of.
Through the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, Trump is drastically altering the federal government, with billionaire Tesla CEO Elon Musk at his side. They have effectively shut down the U.S. Agency for International Development and removed tens of thousands of government workers from their jobs.
The people voted for major government reform. There should be no doubt about that. That was on the campaign. The president spoke about that at every rally. The people voted for major government reform, and that's what people are going to get. They're going to get what they voted for.
Trump campaigned on lowering prices, but inflation has yet to be addressed in a significant way.
The American people voted for solutions to their economic challenges and instead got a corrupt White House and an America that is less safe and more expensive.
The next major challenge for Trump will be working with Congress, including Democrats, to advance his agenda and avoid a government shutdown next month.
The Republicans hold a slim 53-47 majority in the Senate, but they will need 60 votes to pass a funding bill. That means Republican leadership and President Trump will need to convince at least some Democrats to join Republicans in voting for the bill. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
For more now on the Trump administration's first 30 days, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from National Harbor, Maryland is Eric Bolling. He's a New York Times best-selling author and the host of Bolling Show and Podcast. Here in Washington, D.C., Imani is a cultural curator and professor of digital storytelling at George Washington University. Also in Washington, D.C., Simon Marks is the president and chief correspondent of Feature Story News, and Craig Green is a professor of law and government at Temple University in Philadelphia. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Craig, let me start with you. Welcome to the show. You know, as we've been reporting, the Trump administration has carried out these massive layoffs of federal workers, tens of thousands of people affected. This is all being carried out by this newly created Department of Government Efficiency known as DOGE, which is led by Elon Musk. Now, both the president and Musk have been talking about these layoffs. They talked on Fox Channel. Let's listen to what they had to say.
They're finding billions, and it will be hundreds of billions of dollars worth of fraud,
I say waste and abuse, but fraud, waste, and abuse.
The overall goal is to try to get $1 trillion out of the deficit. And if the deficit is not brought under control, America will go bankrupt. This is a very important thing for people to understand.
So, Craig, these massive layoffs, they spurred a number of lawsuits by unions, by individuals, by workers as well. In fact, we had a ruling just a few hours ago this afternoon right here in Washington, D.C. by the district court, which ruled that the unions did not have a right to sue because they would not be harmed by the firings and buyouts. I mean, what do you make of that ruling? And help us understand why firing someone wouldn't harm them.
Sure. I think that particular ruling probably echoes another one a short while ago. It involves a very technical distinction between the union and the union membership. For a lot of employees, there's a bureaucratic process that individuals who are wrongfully fired have to follow. They can't just walk into court with the union on their behalf. But this bigger issue of government layoffs, of course, it affects various areas of government. From nuclear safety to the Department of Justice and lawyers to National Parks Service. This is an incredibly meat cleaver kind of approach to government layoffs and firings. And the big question underneath all of that is, what is the civil service anyway? A lot of folks have worked for the government thinking it was an apolitical job. I used to be a government lawyer. I was not a politically motivated or selected person. And this is really carving out the government's expertise from the inside out. And it's being done with a very, very blunt instrument.
Right, and Craig, there was another statement from the court which said that granting the union's request would also inappropriately interfere with the president's efforts to streamline the federal workforce. Is this the judge saying, look, this president has the right to fire people?
Yeah, I think there are two layers of firing that are legally contested. One is, as I say, civil servants who, since the 1880s, have had a level of political independence, and a lot of American government depends on the idea that government servants, public officials of that level, who are not making policy, they're just doing their jobs, that those people handle Democrats, Republicans from one administration to the next with the kind of expertise that allows them to do that job well across the board for the political spectrum. There's another group of folks who are so-called independent agencies who are protected by Congress. They are insulated from Congress from being fired. You could think of the Federal Reserve, for example, or you might think of the Federal Elections Commission, or you might think of the Securities and Exchange Commission. These are individuals who are by Congress, by statute, supposed to be above politics. And in a separate body of litigation, the Trump administration is challenging that, again, an 80-year set of precedents about independent agencies and suggesting that for all of those folks, civil servants and independent agencies, the president's the only boss and he can fire whoever he wants. Those legal challenges will come forward, and at stake are the basic pillars of American government as they've existed for the last 80 to 100 years.
Imani, cheers. I mean, this is a massive reshaping of the United States government and the way it functions. I mean, what are the implications of what Trump is trying to do here?
Well, the implications are exactly what they want, which is to have utter and complete chaos occurring right now. And for many of us who live here in the DC area, of course, federal workers are all across the United States. Obviously, as we know, we discussed USAID. We have federal workers all throughout the world. And the impact is going to be not only swift, but immediate. And at the moment with this, as the gentleman just mentioned, this sort of meat cleaver method of just we're going to, slash 6, 8, 9, 10% of a budget, which of course sounds really great when you're running a corporation. When you are the leader of the free world and those 8, 6, 7% are actual people, they're families, they're individuals, they're those who, as we just said, work in our national parks. They work for our federal aviation industry. They work in international development. They provide and speak on behalf of the American government all over the world. This sort of chaotic way of addressing, again, what they mentioned in the clip you just shared, all of this massive waste. I think we're seeing that this wasn't a smooth rollout. It wasn't intended to be, and it has real implication for everyday people and their families.
Right, Imani, as we just heard, a lot of this is in the courts right now. A lot more will end up in the courts. But politically, how are Democrats responding to this?
Oh, well, they're not, which is what's very frustrating. Hakeem Jeffries, said about a week ago, they control every aspect of the government. What are we supposed to do? And that's really frustrating. That's very frustrating for those who have put their support behind the Democratic Party, not only in the most recent election, but in general as just lifetime supporters of that political movement. That saying we're just going to really toss our hands in the air and say we have nothing that we can do at a minimum for the next 2 years until we have midterm elections is disheartening, is demoralizing. Right. And it's depressing because they do have options. They're just not choosing to address them at the moment.
Right. Eric Bolling, I want to get your views on what's taking place as far as these layoffs are concerned. But first, something else, and that is Kash Patel has just been confirmed by the United States Senate as the new director of the FBI. I want to get a brief response from you on this. Are we going to see the meat cleaver, as we've just heard, being taken to the FBI as well?
Hopefully, yeah, because that's the American people. That was the mandate they gave Trump. Trump said, I'm going to do this. He forewarned everyone and said, I'm going to go in and clean house. I'm going to, for Craig and Imani to be surprised that this is happening is rather shocking, or to be surprised. How about this, guys? How about let's see how it works? Let's see if Elon Musk and Doge and the rest of the new DC can save $1 trillion, or cut $1 trillion off our deficit, or cut $500 billion in spending. What's wrong with that? What is wrong with Make America Great Again as a slogan? And what is wrong with the American people, taxpayers, saving hundreds of billions of dollars? And you all are going, oh my God, there's some people who are going to be out of work. 90% of the federal workforce, Anand, was working from home for the past 3 years. Cutting the fat, and that's what we need. And
well, Eric, you say, say, let's see how this works. Well, let's look at some examples here. A lot of the criticism that's aimed at the Trump administration is not about the fact that he's trying to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, but the fact that it's being done in the way he's doing it right now. This is not some kind of carefully audited selection of personnel. We heard the meat cleaver comparison, but it's like taking a chainsaw, really. And we look at one example here. 5,000 employees at the Health and Human Services will lose their jobs. Nearly 1,300 employees at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. 1,100 workers at the National Institutes of Health. Here's how the Democrat Senator Chris Van Hollen responded to these particular cuts. Let's listen to him.
When you conduct research into cancer, into diabetes, into Alzheimer's, into heart disease, and into all the other diseases that plague American families, you are saving lives. And taking that away will result in more Americans dying early and more American suffering.
So doesn't the senator have a point there?
Oh, he's full of garbage. Come on, Anand. No one's going to take away cancer research. They're talking about the other stuff, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on BS projects around the world that have nothing to do with America. Gay film in Ireland spend tens of thousands of dollars. They're cutting the fat, the useless fat. America is not a philanthropic organization. We're a country. The American people pay for all this stuff. You may not get this, but as a taxpayer, I'm thrilled. And any Democrat who says, no, I'm fine with all the waste, fraud, and abuse that's going on, should be walked out of D.C., should be thrown out of D.C. on his butt. And that's what Trump is doing. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be surgical. There was too much waste, fraud, and abuse going on that they had to triage. This is exactly what he's doing. He's triaging the American politic, our body, our financial well-being. He's doing it by cutting a lot. He'll bring back if there are things that he cuts that he shouldn't have, he'll bring them back. He's said that. So has Elon Musk.
Simon, great to see you. It's been some time. Good to have you on the show. Now, we're talking about the massive layoffs being instituted by the Trump administration. There's another area that's also being downsized, and that's the role of the United States around the world. I mean, we heard USAID being mentioned. It's been dismantled, now much smaller. It's been incorporated into the Department of State. And look at some of the other things that Trump has pulled out of the Paris Accords, the World Health Organization, the Human Rights Council. It also backed that effort by Israel to completely dismantle the main Palestinian aid organization, UNRWA. And they've also threatened officials who work as judges at United Nations courts. I guess there's two ways of looking at this. You know, it's going to be a loss for many people in many parts of the world. On the other hand, people are saying, well, the United States is giving up its influence around the world by doing these things. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And it must be very confusing for American voters who, of course, were told by Donald Trump that he was going to return to power as president and restore America's luster on the world stage. He was going to shore up America's standing, build alliances. And instead, what he has engaged in is the withdrawal to a considerable degree of America's leadership role on the world stage. It is easy, and we just heard Eric do it, poke fun at some of the woke programs that USAID was bankrolling around the world, but there were far many more very important programs in terms of humanitarian assistance and development aid that USAID was engaged in. And simply to engage in what Elon Musk, who is totally unaccountable and whose Department of Government Efficiency, we should remind people, is not actually a government department, to hear him talk about feeding to the wood chipper the world's largest humanitarian and development aid organization body is an astonishing abnegation of American responsibility on the world stage. But all of that stands as nothing when compared to the depth charge that has gone on beneath European allies over the course of the last week, with the future of the transatlantic alliance now deeply, deeply in doubt, with European leaders, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer going to be here next week, now having to consider, astonishingly, the United States as an adversary, not an ally that is going to guarantee European security. This is a revolution that is taking place in this country. And for all of the executive action, you know, the White House was talking today about President Trump has signed 73 executive orders in the month since he came to power. He has not submitted a single bill, a single proposal for legislative action in Congress. And that tells you a lot. He wants to govern by executive fiat, by diktat. He is not interested in the constitutional arrangements that this country has, and he's certainly not willing to be bound by the guardrails that have, in the last month, largely fallen away.
Eric, a quick response from you.
Yeah, no offense, Simon. Who thought that America was supposed to protect Europe in perpetuity? We've saved Europe twice in 2 world wars. Trump is very much against getting involved in foreign wars. We knew that. That's no surprise. I'm offended as a taxpayer that you would say that I'm supposed to make sure that about the security of Germany and Great Britain. Where are you? Step up. You're not even meeting your NATO required minimum 2.5% of your GDP. We are. We're somewhere like 40% of NATO. Come on, you guys. It's insane to think that America is just going to be the protector, especially when things like Macron calls a meeting upon European leaders to kind of badmouth and undermine what Trump is doing, trying to end the war that is a greater threat to Europe than anything America or Donald Trump could do.
Okay, I want to move on. Craig, something else that's happened over the past 30 days is that President Trump has been trying to end something called birthright citizenship. This is a key tenet of United States immigration law. The White House suffered a legal setback to that effort on Wednesday. Judges have blocked that executive order. Can the president change that? Because birthright citizenship is part of the U.S. Constitution, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that was the idea of the Civil War and the 14th Amendment, and it's been accepted pretty much from that time to this. And I think maybe people have seen it, but a Reagan-appointed judge called the argument against birthright citizenship the most ridiculous case he'd seen in 40 years on the bench. And I think it's a great illustration of the kind of legal challenges, throwing things at the wall, flooding the zone, trying to do every outrageous thing as quickly as possible in the hope that not all of it can be stopped. That's one of the hopes. Maybe in the hope that the Supreme Court in the end will vindicate some of it. That's another of the hopes. And the third hope is that the politic benefit will get way out ahead of any legal repercussions. But I think it is a testament, once again, to the idea that the Trump administration is trying very, very swiftly, with very scant electoral approval, 1.5% popular vote, to transform things in ways that actually would be very difficult for the majority of Americans to accept, and very at odds with what a large number of people had thought were American values, even constitutional values.
Imani, let's look at the views of the American electorate. There was a Washington Post Ipsos poll that found that 57% of Americans believe President Trump has exceeded his authority since taking office. There are also an overwhelming number of Americans who say that he should abide by federal court rulings, and a majority believe the U.S. Supreme Court at some point will enter the fray that's taking place right now, to curb what may be seen as an abuse of power. But at the same time, this same poll shows us that most Republicans would go along with the president. Wasn't the system designed with checks and balances so that we wouldn't be having this kind of thing happening?
It was absolutely designed with checks and balances. And I just want to take 1 second and go back to what Eric said earlier, because Eric, I am not surprised about anything that's happening right now. I read Project 2025. I have been, we've had some conversations over the last several months, and I do, I respect your insight and your opinions greatly. But I'm not surprised. I want to be very clear about that. I'm not surprised, but there are checks and balances. And I do believe that right now, I know we're talking about, yes, there needs to be, cuts in funding, and as also, like yourself, a tax-paying citizen, that I do agree that there have been a lot of misuses of not only our resources. I feel that the United States for a very long time has prioritized some of their alliances, in particular for me with the state of Israel, and not with the will or the interests of Americans here in the United States. So I agree with you that there needed to be a shakeup. But again, there are checks and balances, Anand, as you just said, and there are ways in which it's not, we are not a dictatorship. This is not, Donald Trump is not the king of the United States. He is the elected president, but he is not a king. Yeah. And there are policies and ways and procedures that we have aligned in this country for hundreds of years that should be abided by. What the challenge is right now that we are seeing in real time is really just sort of the bulldoze effect. Right? We're going to come in, we're going to have 73 executive orders day after day. We're going to flood the media. And he is one of the, and has been since his first term, one of the most accessible presidents to the media. He is hosting press conferences multiple times a day. So there is some level of transparency to some of the chaos, but at the same time, it is really challenging to see that despite these federal rulings, despite other places that would offer an alternative to the slashing of funds, that we're just not seeing in real time. But I agree with Eric, wait and see.
Okay. Simon, I want to get back to some of what Eric was saying a moment ago, and that specifically is the relationship between the United States and Europe. As Eric was pointing out, the United States doesn't have any kind of obligation to look after the security interests of Europe in perpetuity. But if we look at the last few decades, the last 7 decades, I would say, since the end of World War II, the transatlantic relationship has been really the bedrock of the international order. I mean, it is changing now, but it has been that way for a very long time. And if we look at what the Trump administration has done just in the past few weeks, well, for one thing, it played a key role in getting a ceasefire in Gaza. And then, in what appears to be a major break from the Biden administration, it opened talks with Russia to try and restore relations there. And it also wants to bring an end to the Ukraine conflict. But as was pointed out, neither the Europeans nor Ukraine were at those initial talks. Now we see this war of words that's come up between President Trump and the Ukrainian President Zelensky. Where's this heading?
Well, absolutely nowhere good in terms of the transatlantic relationship between the United States and the European allies with whom it has worked and on whom it has counted, and they have counted on the United States for fully 80 years. That is over. It's absolutely apparent that there is no rescuing that. And, what is so extraordinary about all of this is that, yes, you're absolutely right. Donald Trump deserves an enormous amount of credit for brokering the Gaza ceasefire. There certainly was an opportunity for Joe Biden to have done that, an opportunity for Joe Biden to have advanced the cause of peace in Ukraine that was entirely squandered during his time in office. But it is the sheer brute use of force and personality by this American president that I think is causing so much anxiety in Europe and in other parts of the world. You can sit down with European leaders and have a perfectly considered and reasoned conversation about how much money they should be devoting to their own defense, but you don't have to cozy up to a dictator in Moscow and flay Volodymyr Zelensky and lie about Volodymyr Zelensky. His popularity within Ukraine, Trump says it's 4%. Actually, it's 57%, higher than Donald Trump's popularity here in the United States, lying about missing billions of dollars. The difficulty is that this is a policy that is not thought out. It's unorthodox. There's nothing wrong with unorthodox policy, but it's also dragging the United States directly into Vladimir Putin's sphere of influence.
Right, Eric, a quick response. I've got less than a minute, though. As Simon points out, the Europeans and the Americans can have a reasonable conversation about their common interests, but why undermine European security interests in the way that it's being seen right now?
I don't see it that way. First of all, there's nothing lying about that we've appropriated and sent Ukraine $180 billion. Congress will tell you that. Zelensky himself says he only sees $75 billion, so there's $105 billion missing. Not a lie. But Simon, I have a question for you. What do we get with this transatlantic partnership, as you call it? What do we get other than making sure Europe doesn't get attacked by its foes? We get nothing. And that's what Trump is saying, and that's what the American people are saying. Enough of that. We're spending all the money with no benefit. That doesn't work.
Okay, we are going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington.